Today we're going to be learning about the origins of the French Revolution, specifically the storming of the Bastille. You may be wondering what led to the revolution and the storming of the Bastille. Well, there are many factors. Firstly, the French government spent huge amounts of money on various causes, mostly defense efforts that resulted in major debt and tensions amongst the people. The 7 Years' War, beginning in 1756, involved much of Europe. France hoped to achieve victory over enemies such as Britain and Prussia. However, they did not succeed, resulting in the loss of territory and major debt. Overall, the war cost France 2.8 billion livres. France also provided major aid to America in order to oppose Britain, about 1.3 billion livres. Poor domestic policies at home, like the 60 million livres per year Versailles cost, aristocratic pensions, and Louis XVI's failed Cherbourg-Cones project cost the 28 an additional 28 million livres. France only grossed about 600 million livres per year. Thus, France could simply not afford these great costs. The country spent the next century paying off this debt.
Another factor that contributed greatly to the storming of the Bastille was the lack of representation of the Third Estate. In 1788, the Estates General was called because of the political deadlock between the monarchy and the aristocracy and the church. However, almost immediately after it was summoned, the three groups within it clashed. The First Estate was the clergy, the Second Estate was the nobility, and the Third Estate was comprised of almost everyone else in the kingdom. Though the Third Estate made up most of the country, the First and Second Estates held far more pull. But in the meetings of the Estates Generals, representatives of the Third Estate made it clear that they wouldn't permit the monarch and the aristocracy to decide the future of the nation. Priest Abbé Sieyès once wrote, "What is the Third Estate? Everything. What has it been in the political order up to the present? Nothing. What does it ask? To become something." However determined the Third Estate was to make their voice heard, however, the aristocracy would limit it with equal determination. They did so in two distinct ways. First, a reconvened assembly of notables demanded that each estate have an equal number of representatives. Second, in September of 1788, the Parlement of Paris ruled that the voting in the Estates Generals should be conducted by order rather than by head. In this way, each estate votes instead of each member, eliminating the numerical advantage of the Third Estate. This discrimination did not go unnoticed. In the face of widespread public uproar over the aristocratic effort to dominate the Estates General, the Royal Council eventually decided that strengthening the Third Estate would best serve the monarchy and fiscal reform. So, in December of 1788, the Third Estate would elect twice as many representatives as either the nobles or the clergy. This so-called doubling of the Third Estate meant it had a more active role in the proceedings of the Estates General. However, the Third Estate's newfound representation didn't seem to translate to actual reform. The representatives brought grievances to the Estates General criticizing taxes, government waste, and corruption, and essentially calling for equality in local representation by the people. But these grievances could not be addressed until the organization of Estates General voting was decided. Tired of being constantly subordinated by the First and Second Estate, on June 1st of 1788, the Third Estate created a new legislative body, one that they called the National Assembly.
The Tennis Court Oath. In order to prevent the National Assembly from convening, King Louis XVI closed the room where the National Assembly usually met. Because the National Assembly no longer had a place to get together, they decided to move their gathering to an indoor tennis court. On June 20th, 1789, the members of the National Assembly vowed that nobody could leave the meeting until the Constitution of the kingdom was established. This vow is now known as the Tennis Court Oath. On June 27th, King Louis XVI formally asked that the First and Second Estates General meet with the National Assembly. King Louis XVI reestablished that the voting would occur by head rather than by order. When the Third Estate was doubled, it was twice as large as the First and Second. Because of this, the king was forced to work with the National Assembly, which renamed itself as the National Constituent Assembly, to govern the country and form a new and improved constitution. This constitution was made with the intent to be more liberal and implement administrative, constitutional, and economic reform.
Soon thereafter, two new forces came into play. First, Louis XVI again attempted to regain the political initiative by mustering royal troops near Versailles and Paris. He seemed to be contemplating the use of force against the National Constituent Assembly. Without consulting the assembly leaders, he abruptly dismissed his Minister of Finance, Jacques Necker, in lieu of his refusal to support the king publicly and unconditionally. This marked the beginning of a steady but consistently poorly executed royal attempt to undermine the assembly and halt the revolution. Most of the National Constituent Assembly wanted to establish some form of constitutional monarchy, but Louis's refusal to cooperate thwarted that effort. Second, the populace of Paris, now at more than 600,000 people, was simply overwhelming the aristocracy. They were active in their political ideals, and by June they organized a citizen militia and collected arms. The people regarded the dismissal of Necker as the opening of a royal offensive against the National Constituent Assembly and of the city. In an effort to protect the assembly, the revolution then began.
On July 14, 1789, the tension that had been building in France reached a head, becoming one of the most historic days in French history. Large crowds of people marched to the Bastille to get weapons for their militias. Due to miscalculations and ineptitude by the governor of the fortress, the troops fired into the crowd, killing 98 people. The crowd stormed into the fortress, releasing 7 prisoners and killing several troops and the governor. This was the spark that started the revolution. After this day, the revolution was in full effect. On July 15th, the militia of Paris, also known as the National Guard, offered command to the Marquis of Lafayette. This development underscored that the revolution was in full effect. It was now the people against the aristocracy and nobles. As tensions increased and blood and death ensued, it was clear that the revolution could not be tampered down, and the aristocracy must do something. This led to further changes within the government and governing of France.
The storming of the Bastille was the spark that started the French Revolution. The royalty and the court were no longer on the offensive against the proletariat, and the king personally visited Paris wearing the revolutionary cockade and recognized the revolutionaries as a legitimate force. A variety of color schemes were used during the storming of the Bastille, but the red, white, and blue tricolor cockade worn by the king was adopted on July 27th as a uniform for the National Guard and thus became a symbol for the revolution. With the royalty on the defensive, the revolutionaries were able to establish themselves as an independent political force, as the king now took the revolution seriously and renounced any direct form of aggression. People gained hope as the strength and presence of the revolutionaries was made more evident. Communes began to be established throughout France to administrate and to fight to crush any attempt at counter-revolution and to make up for the failings of the royal power. The National Constituent Assembly became the government of France. With this new power, the Assembly created a foundational document of the French Revolution that outlined human and civil rights. This document, called the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen, protected the rights of the French citizens and reinforced revolutionary values of freedom and democracy. If it had not been for the storming of the Bastille, none of these impacts could have been possible.
As you have just heard, there are many factors that led to the French Revolution. Poor economic policies caused the country to be in economic crisis, leaving the people with little food. The lack of representation of the Third Estate left the people feeling voiceless and powerless. However, it also caused fury to rise within the French people and led them to take matters into their own hands, specifically seen with the storming of the Bastille, which sparked the French Revolution and changed French history forever. Merci pour regarder, and we hope you enjoyed and learned a lot about the French Revolution and why it started.